Okay, thank you for Dr. Wang to introduce me. So, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Yong Tang, and I'm a fifth-year PhD student at ASU. I work with Julian. So today I will talk about the bio-inspired rotational penetration, DM simulation, and experimental validation, which means my presentation will focus on two parts. One is the simulation, and another one is the experiment. So I think we heard about the bio-inspired flying robot and the bio-inspired swimming robot, but we seldomly heard about the bio-inspired self-burrowing robot. And recently, the Chang 5 get the soil sample from the moon successfully. Well, the moon failed to get this penetrate into the ground for the Mars. So based on this, we think we can design a self-burrowing robot which can be used in many scenarios. For instance, we can use the robot to monitor the moisture content and for the plant, and we can use the robot to collect the soil sample from the extraterrestrial planet. Also, we can use the robot to detect the contaminated area underground. We can also build a robot system which can communicate underground. So in order to design a self-burrowing robot, we get the inspiration from the nature. In nature, there are so many organisms live underground. They use different mechanisms. For instance, the river clam, they use the dual anchor system to penetrate the ground. They also eject the water to fluidize the surrounding soils. The circumvention movement was used by the plant to get the water as a nutrient. The sandfish lizards swim in the granular material by the undulation movement. So in this study, we get the inspiration from the seed ants and the worm lizard. The seed ant has a bilayer structure which can generate the differential deformation, which will result in the rotational movement. So the seed ant can bury itself into the ground for the future generation with the continuous rotational movement. The worm lizard makes the turnover even by oscillating its head around the long axis of the trunk. So both of the rotation movement can reduce the penetration resistance. In this study, we use the DM simulation to investigate the fundamental mechanism of the rotational movement. So before we conduct the rotational penetration simulation, we use the triaxial test to calibrate and validate the microscale parameters. Here is our triaxial sample. In this table, we show the microscale parameters. So here are the stress strain curve and the volumetric strain and actual strain curve. We use 100 kPa kilopascal to calibrate the triaxial test, and we use 200 kilopascal to validate the microscale parameters. The result shows that the numerical data match the experimental result very well. So we will use this set of microscale parameter to conduct our rotational penetration simulation. Here is the sample for the rotational penetration. So we set the same vertical velocity, but we change the rotational velocity. Here the vertical velocity is 0.04 meter per second. So here are the result for the penetration force on the cone and the penetration the shaft direction. So we can see that the penetration resist increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the increase of the rotational velocity. Well, the shaft direction doesn't change too much in this case. Here is the schematic picture for the contact force on the cone. So both the contact normal force and the contact shear force has the vertical component and the horizontal component. The contact normal, the penetration force is related to the vertical component of the contact normal force and that of the contact shear force, as well as the number of particles that contact the cone. Also, the penetration force is related to the orientation of the resultant force. So here is the result for the vertical component of the contact normal force and that for the contact shear force. So we can see that both the vertical component of the contact normal force and that of the contact shear force increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the rotational velocity. Also, the vertical component of contact normal force contribute to contribute more to the penetration resistance than the vertical component of the contact shear force. Here is the contact number on the cone and the shaft. So the contact number on the cone increased first and then reached to a constant value after the cone fully submerged to the soil sample. The contact number on the cone decreases with the increase of the rotational velocity. Also, the contact number on the shaft also increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the rotational velocity. Here is the resulting contact force and the contact angle. So we can see the resulting contact force increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the rotational velocity. Here, the contact angle increases with the increase of the rotational velocity. The maximal contact angle is around 60 degrees, which is the same as the apex angle of the cone. A previous study hypothesized that the reduction of the penetration resistance is because that the rearrangement of the particle around the intruder will influence the force chain network. So we plot the force chain network for the control case, 100 RPM case, and 400 RPM case. So we can see that the strong force chain around the cone becomes weaker and sparser with the increase of the rotational velocity. So which means we testify the hypothesis. We also plot the trajectory of the particle beneath the penetrator. So we can see here for the control case, the particle goes sideways and downward. Well, for the rotational case, the particle goes in a helical shape. From top view, we can see for the rotational case, the trajectory is like a circular shape. For the control case, it's just like the sideways and downward. We also calculated the principal stress inside 1 mm sphere around the penetrator. So here is the principal stress, sigma 1, 2, and 3. We can see that the principal stresses increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the rotational velocity. Besides, during the penetration process, the direction of principal also changes. So we can see from the figure D, E, and F. So this is the major principal stress, the direction in Z direction, Y direction, and S, Y, and Z direction. So we plot the major principal stress at the final stage. We can see that the major principal stress tend to approach to the vertical direction with the increase of the rotational velocity. This provided a theoretical model to calculate the normalized penetration resistance. He assumed that the normal stress will not change whether the cone rotates or not. So we calculated our numerical data and we compare with the theoretical result. The result shows that the normalized penetration resistance is the same for the control case. Well, the normalized penetration resistance for the numerical case is smaller than the theoretical result. So the result shows that the normal stress will change with the rotational velocity. Also, in order to figure out whether the reduction of the penetration resistance is related to the absolute value of the velocities or the ratio between the rotational velocity and the vertical velocity, we conducted two groups of the simulation. One is with the vertical velocity is 0.01 meter per second, and another one is the 0.04 meter per second. So which means the rotational velocity also changes. Here is the normalized penetration resistance. We can see under the same relative slip velocity, the normalized penetration resistance almost the same. So which means the relative slip velocity controls the reduction of the penetration resistance. We also calculated the power consumption for each cases. Here we can see that the power consumption decreases first and then increases with the increase of the rotational velocity, which means there might be an optimal rotational velocity which can reduce the penetration resistance, but also minimize the energy. So in this study, we think the optimal velocity is maybe 200 RPM. To compare with our numerical simulation, we conducted some rotational penetration test. Here we use a robotic arm to provide the vertical movement, and we use a rotor motor to provide the rotational movement. We use Arduino to control the rotational velocity and the rotational direction of the motor. We also use the PID method to maintain the rotational velocity, because once the penetrator penetrates into the soil, if you don't maintain the rotational velocity, maybe the result is not acceptable. Here we use the air perturbation method to prepare the sample, and we did several direct penetration tests to test the uniformity of the samples. The result shows that the reparability of the sample is acceptable for the rotational penetration test. We conducted the rotational penetration test under different relative slip velocity. Here, the relative slip velocity is the ratio between the rotational velocity and the vertical velocity. So this is the penetration force, and here is the resistive torque. So from the result, we can see that the penetration force increases with the penetration depth, but decreases with the relative slip velocity. Well, for the resistive torque, the torque increases with the penetration depth and the relative slip velocity. Previously, I mentioned the relative slip velocity controls the reduction. Here we use the experiment to test this. So we set different vertical velocity and a rotational velocity, but we keep the same relative slip velocity, which is 1.5. So we can see that the penetration force and the resistive torque are the same under the same relative slip velocity. So which means the relative slip velocity controls the reduction of the penetration forces. Here we plot the normalized penetration forces with the relative slip velocity. So we can see that the normalized penetration resistance decreases dramatically at first, and then gradually with the increase of the relative slip velocity. Also, we can see that the reduction is around 80% when the relative slip velocity is around 100. Also, as Julia mentioned before, so it seems there is a turning point. So it's around the relative slip velocity is around 10. So before that, you can see the normalized penetration reduces dramatically. Now after that, it reduces gradually. So we think maybe this is a optimum point. We can use this to design the self-burrowing robot. So here is my summary. So the rotational penetration reduces the penetration resistance, and the reduction of the penetration resistance is related to the magnitude of the contact force, the number of particles that contact the cone, and the orientation of the contact force. The reduction is controlled by the relative slip velocity, and the reduction increases dramatically at first and then gradually. The reduction is about 80% when the relative slip velocity is around 100. And by incorporating the rotation motion, that we could generate the net translation moment for the self-burrowing robot. As Julia mentioned, maybe the horizontal robot, we can use the rotational movement. Yeah, finally, I'd like to thank the support from NS Funding and my research group. That all for my presentations. Thank you.